Okay, our next agenda item is the duck stamp request. Chief of Habitat, Elmer. This is an action item, and it is the Commission will review and be asked to approve 21 projects submitted for funding from duck stamp funds. The total cost of the projects is $139,407. There was a handout, a pamphlet that basically details all the projects. Elmer, you want to come up and get us through this?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, board members. For the record again, Elmer Bull, Habitat Division Chief of the Department of Wildlife. As noted, I'm here to present a list of project proposals that have been submitted by our field personnel for funding from the Duck Stamp Fund. Just a little bit of a background for those that might not be fully aware of what the duck stamp is all about. Any hunter 12 years of age or older that is interested in hunting migratory game birds, ducks and geese and so forth, is required to buy a state duck stamp before they go in the field. The funds generated from that go into what we call the Duck Stamp Fund, and is available to fund projects that are approved by the Commission for the protection and propagation of migratory game birds and for the acquisition, development, and preservation of wetlands in Nevada. We have before us today, and hopefully you've got the support material relative to the project proposals. But we have 21 projects that were submitted by our people, and at a total cost of $139,407. Also included in the support material, this year was a budget. Last year we had a number of comments that we didn't include a budget, so it was hard for the CABs and the Commission members to fully evaluate the project, not knowing where we stood as far as duck stamp funding and the account that we have for it. Just very quickly, at the start of fiscal year 2012, which began at the beginning of July, we have approximately $517,206 in the duck stamp fund. We anticipate or estimate that we'll probably bring in about $90,000 in duck stamp sales for this year. Again, the project total for this year is $139,407. That would leave us with an estimated balance in this budget count of $467,799 at the end of this fiscal year. So, with that, Mr. Chairman, the list is here. Whatever your pleasure is regarding going through these projects, if you'd like me to talk about them, or if there's any questions, whatever is your pleasure.
Okay, I'll bring it back to the Commission for questions. Anybody have any questions after looking at all the projects? Look like some good projects. I do have a question on one, but any of the rest of the Commissioners have any questions? Commissioner Rain.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The wood duck study, you know, it's in its 9th year. I worry about anything that, you know, appears to be unending. I know I've kind of had this issue with before, you know, and we're in 5th year. They were getting some really good information, you know, and when is the end of this project going to happen? I mean, you've got to have I've never really, you know, a lot of these items, let me go back, most of the rest of them, I'm looking at, I go through a list of items, and I'm going, excellent, 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 and then the never-ending study. So where are we at? If we could go over that, please.
Sure, very valid question, and I personally, I could speak in generalities about this project, but I believe Dr. Chris Nicolai is in the audience here and could probably provide a lot better information about this project. And if it's okay with the chairman, I would defer to Dr. Nicolai. The project proposal was actually submitted by Russell Wolfman-Homey, our migratory bird specialist with NDOW, but he's been working in cooperation with Dr. Nicolai, and Dr. Nicolai has been involved with that project for a long time. So if it's okay with you, I would defer to
No problem, that'd be great. Dr. Nicolai, Commissioner Raines is going to restate that question for you.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you. The question is, you know, this project is in its 9th year. So, you know, is it a never-ending study? What was the original goals of it? How has that changed? When is it going to end?
Yep.
And what results do you anticipate? You know, I understand you're going to come up with results. What style of results are you going to come up with?
Right, no, I think that's a very fair question, and thanks for entertaining the question. Basically, we started the project as a volunteer-based effort. Yes, we started in 2003, but we didn't have a penny of funding until the first Heritage grant was awarded for our 2007 field season. So the 2003 through 2006, you know, I was spending my own gas money, had a bunch of volunteer stuff like that. At that time, I was a graduate student at UNR. Once we started, you know, we started developing some questions, you know, just like when you study anything, well, why are they doing this? And we got the Heritage Grant to look at radios. And that funded a radio project for 2 years, and we realized we actually developed a better way than the radios, so we could study more animals. Rather than just the 40 a year, we were actually studying, you know, 1,500 for a much reduced price. And so that led to other questions, and pretty much came to the realization that we could study this population of wild animals almost unlike any other population in the world. I've presented results from this project at several conferences. We're getting a couple publications ready. It's among one of the best marked, best studies of wild animals in the world, just because you're studying them in a fishbowl with all the natural processes going on, which is pretty neat. You know, it really lets you start asking a lot of these other academic or, you know, applied questions. And so we've gotten to the stage now where we've realized we've got something really neat. And if I had my way and we couldn't come up with any more original questions, yeah, we've addressed or collected enough data to just get some neat descriptive stuff, you know, show we did something neat. But I bring in the proposal I'll present later today, I hope, where we've got the system set up now, where we've got a really neat question that we could use it for. So basically we're at the point now where we know we can do some really neat stuff, but it's time to, you know, take advantage of that rather than just describe it. So it's basically set up right now to really do some neat experiments, such as what I'm presenting here.
Dr. Nicolai, could you maybe give an example of the neat? I can see everybody.
Okay. Well, I've got it talk together. It's in my pocket. I can present it whenever you guys want. I was hoping to present it sometime today. I presented it to the Churchill board earlier this week and several other groups over the last few months. One neat component would be estimation of survival probabilities. You guys are probably familiar a lot with the mule deer work and the sage grouse work, stuff like that, where it's really expensive. You know, hanging a radio on a wood ducks, I think we were spending about $185 a piece on those. The necklace type collars on sage grouse are probably about $220. You know, I don't even know what big game are. You know, then you start throwing air flights in there, stuff like that. For us, we're handling a lot of wood ducks, and we're marking them in such a way, we're putting little leg bands on their other leg, similar to a collar on the neck of a goose. so you can read it without recapturing it again. So instead of spending, you know, $185 per animal, where if you've got a finite budget, you know, when we're marking them for 30 cents an animal, we're marking a lot more individuals for a lot lower price. And we can re-encounter these guys a lot. So, you know, in the sage grouse guys, most of the time when you see their estimates, which are pretty good, they're seasonal. Because you can't get up in the airplane that often, you know. Go in the spring once, go in the summer once, stuff like that. We're out here working every day throughout the year now, where we have volunteers out reading bands and stuff. So we're going out and doing your telemetry per se frequently, and we're getting lots of these individuals. So we're able to actually estimate 12 estimates of survival annually. And we could probably do it even smaller if we tried, but for right now, that's pretty neat. That's never been done, as far as I know, with a bird population. So that's pretty neat in itself.
What would you do with those data?
Well, that's kind of what gets into the harvest experiment. A big question is, when does mortality occur? You know, throughout the year. You know, is it when they're sitting on nests and raccoons are pulling them out of natural cavities in cottonwood trees? But a really neat question that exists in the waterfowl world is, if you get into the additive versus compensatory mortality hypotheses that, you know, most of you have been exposed to over the years, you have to ask the question, when is compensation occurring? And if, you know, if you can't break it down, you can't address it with an annual measure. You have to figure out, is it before harvest occurs or is it after harvest occurs? Because if it's happening before harvest occurs, you're shooting birds in an additive manner by definition, which is not good as hunters. You know, if we're trying to harvest animals in a compensatory framework and we're not, we're going to hurt populations. So that's what's really neat with the wood duck study, and actually I cut that one out of my slide to shorten the time of my presentation. But we are showing that most of the natural mortality is occurring after hunting season, before reproduction occurs. So that's showing us right now that harvest in this population is being compensated for by natural mortality, which lends a lot of support. Right now, almost all our waterfowl harvest regulations are derived in an additive framework because the service likes to manage in a conservative manner. So that's where this experiment can provide a lot of information, because no one's been able to do this with waterfowl before, basically because they're studying in a fishbowl.
Okay, and just a follow-up question, does that mean that you know, this study on wood ducks is applicable to all waterfowl?
I'd be willing to bet this is applicable to waterfowl across the continent. Ducks, geese are a little bit different. And in my shop, I work for the Fish and Wildlife Service currently, we have these exact same questions with eagle mortality on energy development. You know, so when we have a lot of eagles, and I've changed my definition over time. You know, as a kid I was a hunter, and then you turn into harvest, and I'd say it's actually kill now. And we have, you know, permits for kill permits for energy development, you know, limits on how many eagles they can kill in these energy developments, which, as many of you are aware, is what's holding up energy development in this state, is my shop. And it raises a really neat question, is yes, we're killing birds, but is it really doing anything to the population? Yeah, I'll show in my talk, and there's been several studies with waterfowl, where if you randomly go out and collect birds and then weigh and measure again hunter-killed birds, hunters are usually killing the lowest quality individuals in the population. They're more vulnerable to being taken. They tend to decoy more often, stuff like that. They don't stay in the refuge till dark. So yeah, I'll have a lot more information like that. But yeah, I think there's a lot of applicability, and that's why my shop's been interested in supporting this while I've moved to my new job, is because of its potential applicability to things like energy development.
Okay, well, I'm sure we'll have more details about your project later on. Elmer?
Chris, if it's okay, I'd like to expand a little bit and talk about the regulations, complicated regulations, and where this research and the data gleaned from it might go. One of the challenges that waterfowl hunters have today, and I think it's probably even forced some people out of the game of waterfowl hunting, is the complicated regulations that we have, and referring primarily to species restrictions, gender restrictions in the regulations. that require a hunter to be pretty adept at identifying species and the genders of birds as they're out hunting. And some folks, I've heard it, I've worked waterfowl check stations for a lot of years, and I've heard people complain about that. I've talked to people out there that said they got out of the game of waterfowling because the regulations were so complicated. I think one of the things, and Chris and I have discussed this at length, is one of the, something that might come out of this data might indicate that hunting is not a major impact to waterfowl populations and a limiting factor on species and so forth. And if this goes a certain direction, and we never know for sure, but that's what Chris is working on in this study is intended to bring out, is if that isn't true and if it's applicable across waterfowl species in general, perhaps someday we could see a simplification of the regulations to where hunters are not going to be at risk out there hunting if they cannot identify birds and so forth. And that's one of the reasons that I'm able to continue to support this project. It started out doing a few things, but similar to a lot of research, one thing leads to another. And if through this research we could realize simplification of waterfowl regulations, which would encourage people to stay in the sport of waterfowl hunting, get into the sport of waterfowl hunting. We're looking at a sport right now that's not doing real well as far as recruitment of new hunters into it. And if this process could lead that direction, I'm definitely in favor of supporting a project like this, because I feel that data may come out. It may not come out, but we need to find that out.
A portion, just the same question, which was, thank you, some great answers there. That really clarifies stuff. When do you see it ending? Is there an end you can say now, or is it indefinite?
I'd say, personally, I'd probably carry the project out as long as I'm here. It's kind of recreational activity for me. Whether it's funded or not is a different question. The harvest experiment that I've proposed, which is what this is referring to, what I'm asking for from hunting regulation standpoint. I could see that wrapping up in about maybe 3 more years. I'll explain that a little bit in my talk, just so you guys can see what I'm looking for with a regulatory change. But I'll provide that later. But for this component of the project, I'd say three more hunting seasons. This one, another one more, and then we're wrapped up for this question.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Schrum, I see you reaching for the...
We'll try this one. Correct me if I'm wrong. Going through your literature, is it true that the raccoon is responsible for about 70% of the mortality on your wood ducks?
Yeah.
Okay, now, that being the case, what are you going to do about this?
About raccoons?
Well, I would think so, yes. If you have a problem and you know that something is causing 70% of your problem.
70% of the mortality is
Yes,
attributed
so
to
what's your remedy to go ahead and increase your wood duck population?
I'd say even with that, I'd say the evidence would be the wood duck populations increased dramatically.
Okay, now let me try that again. What are you going to do about it?
About predation component?
About the fact that raccoons are busy just raising hell with your wood duck population.
Actually nothing, because I'm interested in that, monitoring natural processes.
And so we keep funding the program, and we fund the program, and raccoons keep on eating your wood ducks.
Right, and that's a very important, and I got one comment from, I tried to provide as much information as I could before these meetings, and I got one good comment from one in the Washoe County Board, which suggests he thought we were studying wood ducks kind of like a high fence for elk. And it's like, yeah, we are, if you maintain all the natural processes within that high fence. So what we're able to do is maintain all the natural things such as raccoons, which occur throughout wood duck range continentally, and study them under a microscope. It's not like we want to study them in a high line, high fence situation where we remove all the natural processes. That's a key component, you know, especially when I bring in these issues of compensation and stuff. Predation is one of the most powerful mechanisms for compensation to occur. You know, you have other mechanisms, disease, reduced reproductive value, stuff like that. And that's a key component that would need to be maintained in such a question. Does that answer?
Well, it seems to me that is not the answer. If we're gonna go ahead and fund a project, and you wanna go ahead and I would assume increase the population of the wood duck, is that correct?
Currently, I'm interested in monitoring a population more intensively than anybody under natural processes. I'm interested in the ecological processes going on, you know, in a natural state.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions on the wood duck, or any comments?
So,
Commissioner Rob?
just so I can clarify, so what you're saying is if you did go take some raccoons out to help save the wood ducks, raccoons are naturally occurring in other parts of the country, that would invalidate your study in other parts of the country if you were adapting even just one part of the natural environment. So to keep your study whole for continent-wide,
For that question.
you need to not impact one part.
Right. His example is actually a good one where, you know, all of a sudden you're developing your own hypotheses here about wood duck population levels are restricted by predation. That sounds exactly the same pathway Delta waterfowl's been working for the last 20 years. And they've developed their own hypotheses. That would be something, maybe I'll be back here in 4 more years, we're talking about this as a predation study. It's a different hypothesis, different than what I currently have proposed, but it's definitely a viable alternative one. And yeah, we can talk about that some more later from Delta's fundings, where given their 15 years of working on predator removal, they're ceasing doing it pretty soon because of the results they got.
Okay, any other commissioners' questions? My only question, and this is off the wood ducks, is the item on the North American Waterfowl Management Plan support. Just curious, maybe go into that in a little bit more detail than what was provided here, and tell us what that is.
Sure. And I'm not sure how the agency originally committed to this program, but we, in support of the North American Waterfowl Management Plan and the recognition that a great number of the waterfowl that pass through our area and are available for hunting originate in some of the prairie provinces of Canada, certainly. In this case, Alberta and Saskatchewan. And a number of years ago, NDOW made the commitment, along with other states, to contribute funding to activities in Canada, primarily channeled through Ducks Unlimited. And we have continued to support that. Some other states, I believe, have kind of dropped out of that. But we certainly recognize the need to preserve and enhance the wetlands in Canada that provide the waterfowl that pass through this area. So we continue to support that.
Okay. This is an action item, so does that conclude your presentation then?
Yes.
Okay. Then I guess I'll bring it back to the commission for comments before we go out to the public. Commissioner.
We could discuss all the projects, right, that are proposed. We're not just limited to the wood ducks.
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah. Okay. Elmer, on the project submitted by Marcus Jones for the Kurtz Wildlife Management Area, the pond leveling there, the old place. What are would you happen to know offhand what the grade variations are in that 40 acres?
No, in fact, that's probably the first step that we need to take in that project, is getting a topographic survey done down there. We had hoped to get started on that the previous fiscal year, and because of shifts in personnel and a little bit loss of man time down there, we weren't able to get to that, but that would be the very first step to do a
Okay,
feasibility.
you've already got a $750 an acre.
That,
Is that a bid, or is that, or are you gonna do it, is the department gonna do it, or are you gonna hire somebody, or?
no, the estimate that was included in that project proposal was based on a similar leveling project that was done at the Mason Valley Wildlife Management Area about 3 years ago. Just in an effort to try to come up with a ballpark figure for this proposal, that figure was used.
There's not much water there now at that old place. In fact, I don't see any when I drive there, any water at Old Place.
Right, right, and it's a function of how we manipulate water flows out there, and certainly if we did more work at Old Place, and we've actually looked at a couple of different areas out there for future leveling work, and at that point we would alter the water management plan and use more water over there.
Okay, there'll be no fish there. I mean, the water will be too shallow.
That's absolutely correct, yeah.
Yeah.
It would be managed as a waterfowl wetland with periodic drying, more than likely periodic irrigation, instead of continuous flooding in an effort to grow moist soil plants with flooding later on in the fall and winter.
One last thing, when Marcus gets over there with the grader, have him hit that road every now and then.
I will
tearing up too many boat trailers over there.
You know, we certainly try to, and I don't know how often Marcus grades roads, but one of the double-edged swords here, I guess, with maintaining roads on wildlife management areas is the smoother we make them, the faster people go, and the quicker it gets bumpy again. So it's really a tough deal, but we try. It's not that we don't ignore them. They've got a tremendous grader there, so I'll mention it to him.
When the fire's not flat. Thank you.
Commissioner Drew.
The only comment I'd make, Elmer, is, you know, I read through all these projects, and I think you have a really good mix, and I think that's a compliment to you and your staff for putting that together. And the only question I have is how much you're carrying over from year to year in the account kind of as principal, and your thoughts on that. Are there more projects out there that we need to be funding and developing, or maybe just commentary on that?
Sure. That's a really great question, and I should have talked about that when I went through the brief budget overview. One of the reasons that we're packing a really large balance in the duck stamp account was that a number of years ago we identified a project at the wildlife management area, actually within Toulon Lake, through which we would construct cross dikes in Toulon Lake to better manage water in that area in years when water supplies are really low. Right now, water flows into that area, enters the center of the lake, and goes clear to the other end, and oftentimes doesn't create the type of habitat that we would like. So we would like to put some cross dikes in there. We began the process of implementing that project. Ducks Unlimited has done a topographic survey of Toulon Lake, identified the locations where those low-level dikes should go. The land within that area is checkerboarded land. We own alternating sections. The Bureau of Reclamation owns alternating sections. When we began consultation with the Bureau of Reclamation about implementing that project, we slammed into some serious roadblocks associated with cultural resources that are out there, and the need for us to have an assessment done on those cultural resources. And we basically got to a point where we were loggerheads with them over that and what they're asking us to do. I was just on a tour at the Humboldt area a couple of weeks ago with Director Mayer and some other staff. We looked at that again. We are prepared to take another run at the Bureau of Reclamation to see if we can come away with a reasonable compromise on what would be required in the way of cultural resource surveys to accomplish what we want to do. But that was one of the reasons that we're carrying this large balance. We maintained and held money back in anticipation of having to spend a significant amount of money on this project. that's why that balance is sitting where it's at.
Commissioner Mitch.
So kind of a follow-up, Elmer, with these wildlife obligated reserve accounts, we see those numbers up, those balances up. Is it secure from being taken through legislative process or budgetary process?
I guess I'm not really qualified. I would defer to Mr. Cates.
Ken Mayor, for the record, yeah, they're dedicated funds. They've not been, no one's ever talked about taking those dedicated funds. Patrick might want to comment duck stamp and other obligated.
I know that they're designated. They have to be used for what is outlined for duck stamp use and stuff like that. But are they protected at the state legislative level, the budgetary level? I've probably heard this before, but I'm asking it again.
Well, I suppose there's always some risk that the legislature can pass any law they choose and try to go after any money they want to, but they have not went after any of our fee-based revenue because we've been able to argue that it's there's federal regulations that don't allow a state to take sportsmen's dollars and divert them to some other purpose, and that would jeopardize our federal funds. And they've never went after anything in the obligated reserve. I think there was some discussion during a special session about heritage funds. They backed off on that because of the federal regulations, so I think they're pretty safe.
Okay. No further commission comment. Oh, one more. Commissioner Schramm.
Mr. Chairman, on this wood duck project, I have a real aversion to spending any more time on this project. I think 9 years is more than enough. Okay,
your comments noted. Why don't we take it out to public for public comment right now and see if there's anybody's got any ideas on any of these projects. Mr. Harwell.
Darrell Harwell, representing myself. The wood duck project that Nevada Waterfowl does also helps with the state because waterfowl is under the federal jurisdiction, and the state must do banding in order to keep our standing in order to hunt waterfowl in the state. So the study that we do with the wood ducks does help, kind of kills two birds with one stone. It does give a banding, it does help the federal guidelines so we can hunt migratory birds in the state. And what better way of spending duck stamp money from hunters that buy this stamp than on a duck study. I know that you guys are tired of it, but the overall, when you look at the federal guideline, I mean, ducks up in Alaska and Canada are over 11% higher than last year, and yet we still only have 7 that we can take, 14 in possession, and as he says, you definitely have to tell your difference between redheads, canvasbacks, and it's kind of hard to do in the molt season. So the research that Chris is doing for this, that could help that out later on down the road, if we can show it and change this, I think what the federal framework on is a law that they used to set the limits was back in 1958.
I'm not certain on that.
I mean, something that was in 58 dictates on what we can do. And if Chris' research goes the way we're hoping it will go, we can change that. Second thing, I think you guys really should put in your consideration. I know that you're tired of seeing Nevada waterfowl, and you're tired of seeing this wood duck project. But it's also put this state on the map with other agencies. And it's not big game.
Gill. For the record, Gil Young, Carson Advisory Board. We tried to gather as much information from as many different duck hunters and people who, waterfowl hunters who were out there. And the general consensus that we got back from members of the board who are avid waterfowl hunters, as well as about a half a dozen other people that we were able to contact who were known to really know what they're talking about. And we explained, we gave them copies of what was going to happen. We knew it was going to say, well, you know, you're going to be precluded from going in this area and taking waterfowl. And after thinking about it and the discussions that we had with them, they were all willing to sacrifice the ability to hunt in order that they gather the information, because what they felt that the information that they brought back was going to be far more valuable than the fact that they weren't going to be able to take waterfowl for a period of time in a locale. And so it's very much like you just heard. It's for the better good. It's going to help us in the long run, and it may have information that relates to other types of waterfowl. So it's good stuff to have. Yes, you've been carrying the cost for quite a while, and they're asking for 3 more years, and I think that's what we have to look forward to. Thank you. Mr. Turnipseed, go ahead.
Mike Turnipseed for the record. He was talking about me just a minute ago. I gave up waterfowl hunting about 20 years ago. And I would get back into it if it wasn't so specific, species specific and gender specific. What's the limit on canvasback drake? None or one? Can I tell a drake canvasback from a scaup? Sure. Can I tell a drake canvasback from a drake shoveler with the sun coming up in my eyes and the duck blind? No, I can't tell. I would definitely get back into duck hunting if it wasn't so gender specific.
Mr. Dixon.
For the record, Paul Dixon, Clark County. First off, I'd like to commend the Department of Wildlife and their staff for this year actually putting together something that was intelligible, in a fashion that went through and basically gave the background and other things. The only piece that got clarified here that I didn't have, and because I was traveling for work, I didn't get a chance to call you, is why we were running such a high account balance. That was the only missing piece from this. You guys got a tremendous amount of comments from both the public as well as other members of the Clark County Advisory Board on this. And having said all of that, we agreed that every project in here we liked and agreed with where it was going. The concern that Clark County had, and I made a commitment to start working with them, is that we've had a couple of years of people on the advisory board from the Overton area. I mean, I had, you know, in general, when Commissioners Howe, Schrum, and McBeth have been there, my general attendance is anywhere between 8 and 12 people in the public. I had 22 people, most of them duck hunters. The rest of them were people who were interested in the bear issue and bobcats. But to be honest with you, we have that meeting in Overton, so we get the duck hunters involved. And when they looked at this, we have basically allowed the Overton area to slowly degrade over time. And we've removed the on-site rep from there, plus we've lost representation on board. We just got new representation back, a guy named Jackie Holt, who's a veterinarian, and we're committed to start working with them to define the type of things they'd like to do at Overton, and we would, as we have these meetings, I'd like to involve some of your staff so we can determine whether it's duck stamp, upland game bird, or whether we need to put in proposals to Heritage. And depending on whether we have matching federal funds and that sort of thing, we can decide which of these programs gets in there. Because when you look at the amount of money that Southern Nevada has gotten, we've gotten everything we've asked for, first off, let me say that. It's not because we put in and didn't get it. We're not asking, and so we need to develop the program because that resource is degrading, and we need to bring it back. Thank you.
Are you taking comments on the bear hunt?
No, this is specifically on the duck stamp. We already had public comment where you could have made comments on the bears. But this will be later. And there will be later?
the end of the day.
Yeah, later on today.
It'll be at the end of your agenda or sometime thereabout?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you.
Okay. Any other public comments on the duck stamp projects? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. Any other comments by members of the commission? Commissioner Raines?
Thank you. Just a question that came up here was, what are the banding requirements? And I'm not too familiar exactly with those requirements to meet federal regulation and this duck stamp and the wood duck that helps with that. I'm not too familiar with that. If you could expound upon that, was implied.
I'm not exactly sure on what was said there as far as actual banning requirements. We are definitely encouraged to ban and to try to gather data here on what our populations are doing here in Nevada. I'm not certain, and maybe Russell's in the crowd could help me out here, but I don't believe we're required to ban waterfowl. It's a research-generated, data-generated type process, and it's good that we do it. We do a lot of banding actually in Nevada, and the numbers are way up last year on the number of birds banded. Much to Chris's credit, it's not just a wood duck project out there. There's also a lot of other banding going on at Mason Valley and in the Wahatan Valley, exclusive of the wood duck banding program, but I don't think we're required to do that.
We might have Russell.
Russell Wilson here with the Department of Wildlife. There's not a requirement for the banding, but under the flyways, under the management plans that are in place through the flyway process, the federal government has started to put together management plans for each of the species, and under those plans, they're setting goals for each of the states to reach. Right now, the only plan that's finalized in place is on mallards, and we have a goal annually of banding 4,000 mallards. And that's the first one to come down the line. As they add additional ducks, there's going to be additional goals for us to reach. And the purpose behind those is so that they can recoup the data from harvested ducks that's used in the management of the species, the various species. So last year, we didn't reach our goal for mallards for the state. There was, as Elmer has indicated, there was some banding that went on around the state, but a large portion of the mallards that were banded were a side benefit to the wood duck project. Chris, when the graduate students that are working on this are out there, and I've been out before on capture processes before, and you catch wood ducks and you catch a large number of mallards that are also banded to go towards Nevada's goal.
Mr. Chairman, I might mention, I do sit on the Pacific Flyway Council for the state of Nevada, and while it's not a requirement, it's part of doing business, and it's in the state's best interest to do as much as we can to reach those goals, because it's the mark recapture that recaptures a dead duck that would turn in by a hunter. That's one aspect of it. That helps drive their population models, which the adaptive harvest management strategy is built upon. So it's all connected, and so the stuff that Chris is doing with the wood ducks, it's got some of the feds sitting up on the edge of their seat, even though he is a fed now. We try to get him to it. But it's because of Dr. Nikolai's expertise in this that the non-hunter or even anti-hunting bent has to sit up and take notice when you have published studies that actually show compensatory mortality or additive.
Mr. Chairman, I would just add, in looking at the progress report from last year and the duck banding work that went on, there were a total of 3,172 ducks banded in the Mason Valley, Wahatan Valley area. So and it included a pretty good variety, I think 9 different species of birds. So we're getting some good stuff done, getting some good data.
Thank you. Commissioner Drew?
based on the fact that we've got 9 cabs in support of this item and none in opposition, I'm prepared to make a motion to support the FY 2012 duck stamp projects as proposed by the department.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, any further comment from the commissioners? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and take a vote on the duck stamp request for approving the 21 projects, total project cost $139,407. All in favor, state aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Commissioner Shaw? Okay, motion passes.